in a sign that Beirut's tension with Gulf Arab countries are easing. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati stressed in a statement on Monday that they need to stop all Lebanon-originated activities that affect the security and stability of Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Arab countries. He added the Lebanese government is committed to strengthening cooperation with Saudi Arabia following a phone call with Kuwait's Foreign Minister Sheikh Ahmed Al Mohammed. The Saudi ministry on Tuesday said it welcomed Mikati's statement, adding it hoped that it will contribute to the restoration of Lebanon's role and status on the Arab and international levels. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries expelled Lebanese envoys last year in a diplomatic spat that has deepened Lebanon's economic crisis following critical comments about the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen by Lebanon's former information minister, George Koda. Riyadh says the crisis with Lebanon had its origin in a Lebanese political setup that reinforces the dominance of the Iran-backed Hezbollah armed group and continues to allow endemic instability. Saudi Arabia and its fellow wealthy neighbors once spent billions of dollars in aid in Lebanon and still host a huge Lebanese in diaspora. But the friendship has been strained for years by the growing influence of the powerful Hezbollah movement in Lebanon. The financial meltdown has crashed the Lebanese currency and left most of the population facing poverty amid skyrocketing commodity prices in the international market. While the United States has urged Sri Lanka to end the tensions under its draconian anti-terror law and ensure justice for wartime atrocities, Sri Lanka's right record has drawn the ire of the international community, with Colombo accused of carrying out wartime atrocities against its Tamil minority during the decades-long civil war that ended in 2009. The pressure from the European Union, which threatened to revoke the country's favorable trade status, Sri Lanka's parliament on Tuesday amended its controversial Prevention of Terrorism Act, but opposition legislators have said the changes will not stop abuses under the law. This year, U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs Victoria Nuland stressed the importance of the non-governmental sector, journalists and civil society, and ending surveillance, ending detention, and ending harassment after talks with local leaders in capital Colombo. Her remarks came a day after Colombo reduced detention without judicial supervision under the PTA from 18 to 12 months. As many as 78 Tamil prisoners are behind bars under the act without being formally charged, some of them for more than 3 decades. Right activists have also said they face increasing pressure from security authorities, while many journalists have complained of attacks and intimidation. Nordland arrived in Sri Lanka on Tuesday night on a brief overnight visit after traveling to Bangladesh and India. She said improving human rights will ease cooperation around security between Washington and Colombo. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll go straight to Canada, where our guest is standing by to talk more on World Tuberculosis Day. That's in a moment. Stay. just joined in, this is International Tit Bit here on Atlantic Television Network, and we are broadcasting live from Lagos. 24th of March every year is set aside for World Tuberculosis Day and is observed to raise awareness about the serious bacterial disease that affects the health of the lungs. They also highlight the social and economic consequences of tuberculosis along with its health impact globally. Today, World Tuberculosis Day was the day when Dr. Roberts announced his discovery of the bacterium that causes TB. Commemorating this discovery in 1882, the day is observed worldwide. This year, World Tuberculosis Day is themed Tuberculosis, Invest to End Tuberculosis and Save Lives. The theme focuses on need for investment and resources that are required to eradicate the disease. It is a way of conveying these needs to global leaders to reinforce their commitment to fighting the disease. The theme also ensures access to prevention and care of TB in order to achieve universal health coverage by WHO. Joining us on the program from Canada is Dr. John Emelike. He is the president of Oria Foundation. John, good afternoon. John, can you hear me?
The name is Peter. Peter.
I beg your pardon. I'm so sorry for the mix-up, Dr. Peter. So sorry. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm okay. Nice to see you.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you. Nice. Good to see you too. So today is World Tuberculosis Day. Some people may not understand the significance of why a day should be set aside to celebrate or to raise awareness, rather, of the subject tuberculosis. Can you give us your 2 cents about what tuberculosis is about, basically?
Thank you for this opportunity. Tuberculosis is a disease that is quite common in Nigeria and in many tropical countries and underdeveloped as well as developing countries of Africa, of Europe, of Asia. It's not so common in places like Canada and the US, but because of movement and migration and immigration, we tend to see more of those cases in Canada and in the US, but it's more rampant in Nigeria in terms of case numbers. It's a disease that's airborne and also by droplets. So usually from an infected person, when they cough or they leave like saliva in the environment, or people come in contact with these droplets or they inhale these droplets, that's how people get infected. So basically in Nigeria, there's been vaccination protocols like the BCG that's given to children at birth that helps to prevent them from getting things like miliary tuberculosis or tuberculosis of the lungs when they grow up. So basically it's been something that Nigeria has been fighting for quite a long time. A lot of resources have gone into it, but I think the theme for this year is Invest in Tuberculosis. Why was this theme developed? It's mainly because of COVID. COVID is also a respiratory illness, and we saw how much resources that was put into fighting COVID, and how everybody came together and fought COVID, and we're seeing reduced numbers now. So there was like a diversion of resources from fighting TB to fighting other things like COVID. So the focus, or more like you're trying to get the focus back on fighting TB, because we're still seeing like a high number of people. As a matter of fact, more people die of TB in Nigeria than people that died of COVID. So it's really just calling on government, parastatals, different organizations and bodies to put more focus on TB, because it's also a big killer, especially in countries like Nigeria. Nigeria is like third, I think, after like China and India. And China and India have a very huge population, like in the billions. So Nigeria is about 200 million, and we have like the third highest number of cases. So you can imagine how many that is. Few things that predispose people to it is like when they have low immunity. So you find it more amongst people with HIV, and then AIDS, and then people that have things like diabetes, smokers, people that smoke, and other forms of other conditions that may cause people to have low immunity, cancers and things like that, predisposes people. But mostly, like a big chunk, at least 10% or more of the cases are from people that have HIV. It's usually one of the biggest diseases that we treat people with HIV for.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter. I was going to come to that before you mentioned that. What are the causes of tuberculosis? It's scary because I read that it's airborne. I don't know what the veracity of that is, but that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. But again, aside from people with underlying health issues, as you have mentioned, people living with diabetes, people with HIV, and people with cancer can really go down with tuberculosis, given that their their immune system is low because of the illness. What other causes, can bring about one to have tuberculosis, aside from people, as I said, with underlying health issues?
So basically, people in prisons, health workers, doctors, nurses, everybody that works in the healthcare system. If you take care of somebody that has any of those immune compromised conditions and they do develop tuberculosis, you're at risk of getting the TB. So those are the main people that are at risk. So if you're working in the hospital or whatever it is that you're doing, and especially if you're working like in most Nigerian public hospitals where infection control is not at the greatest, there's always that high risk of being exposed to it. And then if you probably have a family member that has it or is exposed to it, because sometimes it's really hard to differentiate tuberculosis from other infectious respiratory diseases. So sometimes people have it and then it goes unnoticed, or they probably spread it without even knowing. And then, like you said, yeah, it's like it's from droplets. People coughing it, like infected people when they cough. Those droplets in the air, in the environment, through all those things you can get infected.
So one can get infected whether or not your immune system is low. If you live around, or you work around, or you interact with people living with TB, you can get it because it's airborne, right?
So it's more like exposure. So it depends on the amount of exposure, just like we had with COVID. So it depends on the amount of time you spend with people that are infected with TB. I must let you know there's active TB and then there's latent TB. So latent TB is when they probably have it in their blood, but they don't have any symptoms and they can go for the rest of their life and they are not infectious. They don't have any problems. But if you come in contact with someone that has active TB that is symptomatic, they have a cough and they have a fever and then it's long standing. Usually the cough in tuberculosis would last anywhere from like a month, 3 months. It's like usually very prolonged. And they also have things like night sweating and high fevers. So those kind of things. So usually what we say is if you have a cough that's not resolved in 3 months, 3 weeks, 1 month, you're having fevers at nights, you're drenched in sweats, you're losing weight, all those things are like signs just to say that it could be TB, and then whoever is in contact with you should probably get themselves tested as well so they can also get treated. There's treatment for it. Treatment is very effective in like 80, 87, 90%. The only thing what we worry about is when people get infected with the resistant strain as a result of like people not completing treatments or like super infections and things like that. But for the most part, when you get the right medication and you get treated, you're usually good. There are other forms of TB. There's TB of any part of the body. There's TB of the skin, of your throat. Any other part of the body can get infected with TB. It's an infection, but mostly affects the lungs. And if you were vaccinated as a child with BCG, usually it's good for most of your life. But like I said, things that reduce your immunity pregnancy can reduce your immunity, diabetes, any condition that makes your immunity drop can make you more susceptible to getting infected.
So, Dr. Peter, talk to us a bit about the signs to look out for, because it's a bacteria, and most bacteria have similar signs. You see cough, you see cold, sneezing, and all that. So one may be predisposed, or one may be infected with tuberculosis and not know, because you'll assume it's malaria because you're going down with signs of malaria. They say look out for weakness of the body, maybe cough and all that. What are the signs to look out for? Because you said it's almost difficult to tell between tuberculosis and a regular cough. Some people have regular cough and they cough for like as long as 2-3 months, and it's not tuberculosis. I've seen such cases. But what are the signs to really look out for to say, okay, so this is time for me to go to the hospital to be sure this is not TB when one is infected?
So I think the major thing that you take from the symptoms is the length of time. I mean, there are conditions like bronchitis, or somebody that's like a chronic smoker that has COPD or something that would probably have prolonged cough. But if you're having a cough and a fever and it's prolonged anywhere from like 3 weeks upwards and it doesn't seem to be resolving, you should get worried. Like when you listen to most medications or like drugs they advertise online, they really say after a specified number of days, your symptoms are not improving, see your doctor. So that's the same thing for this. If you have a cough and you're having a fever and it's like really high fever that you're having, night sweating and drenching, and it's lasting 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's just going, you should be worried. And you should see a doctor. That's definitely beyond malaria. That's definitely beyond any infection that COVID is probably going to last you maybe 7, 10, 14 days. It's not going to go up to 3 weeks. You understand? So tuberculosis is like longer. It's anywhere like 3 weeks, and it just goes on, and the fever goes on as well. So it's not like someone that has like a bronchitis or it's an allergy and they just have cough for like So you probably have a cough because you keep clearing your throat and all that, but you don't have a fever. That's probably not going to be tuberculosis. Tuberculosis will have the fever and the cough for a protracted course of time.
So talk to us again about the clinical adverse effect of not dictating early enough that one is down with tuberculosis.
So the major thing is you probably get other people infected, people close to you. If you have people that are immune compromised, like elderly people or someone that's pregnant or someone that has diabetes, children, people with low immunity, basically, you probably get them exposed. Not everybody is going to react the same way. Some people might end up dying of it if they don't get treatment in time. So you'll be worried about exposing other people to the tuberculosis. And then it could also, if you don't get treated, there's always that chance of it becoming fatal. But on a normal day, it shouldn't be, because there's antibiotic regimens that we use and treat people for a few months, and then they're good as new.
So it's alarming that more people have passed from tuberculosis, as you mentioned in the course of the show, than even COVID. But we see that not much has been said in terms of tuberculosis. I mean, campaigns from health centers or health workers. People talk more about HIV, people talk more about malaria, people talk more about COVID now for the past 2 to 3 years. But like I haven't seen that very intense campaign about tuberculosis, to be careful. We're not wearing nose masks, and it's like it's a new normal. I feel that this is something that we should have incorporated into our daily lives, at least for the sake of tuberculosis, seeing how deadly that it is. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's why we have days like this. When the WHO marks the day for tuberculosis as for other illnesses. So at least if you never get to hear about it prior to now, you probably be aware of it today. That is the day that we are marking the tuberculosis, and you probably get this information. But I feel like health workers, public health systems they're doing the work of passing out the message. But people listen to what they want to listen to. People listen to more of what is sensational at the moment. Like, for example, COVID was on the news every day, every night. So people got the message more. HIV is something that you can't be treated for and probably kills people, or you probably get through sexual transmission. So people take it more seriously, and there's more awareness about it. So at the end of the day, it's the way that the health ministry or the public health system see it, and the way that people in general just see it. So they see it as something that is not, like when something can be treated, just like malaria also kills as much people, more people than even COVID. But it's just something that we just ward off, and we don't pay too much mind to it. So it all depends on the way that people see it. In this part, it's been eradicated to a very, very large extent because they took it seriously, and then they dealt with it. Because a lot of the control goes into also hygiene, infection control at the hospitals and places where you have a lot of people infected and all those kind of things. It also helps in the control of this infection. So it's the state of mind of the people. So, I mean, the Ministry of Health, I'm aware, is doing their best. Doctors, nurses, health workers are doing their best to inform people about this condition. But at the end of the day, it depends on how seriously people take their health. It determines how they take this information.
Very true. So before we let you go, for those who are viewing, what's your advice for them? For one who has had cough or had like a relative or a friend cough for a while now, what would you say to them? First aid. And then for those who are preventing, what else can they do? Because sometimes when you live in a family where you have siblings, you can't really run away from your home. And you have a sibling that's been coughing for a while and has refused to see the doctor. What do you think, in such conditions we can do to prevent being infected by tuberculosis?
So it's prevalent in Nigeria and in highly populated countries, as I had mentioned, for a reason, because it's more common in densely populated areas. So if you're living in a densely populated area, or you're living in housing conditions that are densely populated, you're at a higher risk if your house is not well aerated, like in terms of ventilation. And like I said, some people probably have it, but they don't know. Because I said there's an active form and then there's latent forms. People are infected and they don't know they're infected. It's just there. Probably when the immunity breaks down, then it becomes active. So it's just for everybody to get tested. Today is the awareness day. If you can go and get tested, make sure that you don't have TB. There are lots of people that just come and then they do the test and they find out, oh, they have latent TB. They've had it probably for like years and they never knew that they had it. It's like HIV. It could be there and you never know because you never have any symptom. So you've probably been exposed to it. Some people probably have it, but they don't know. So the message I'll say to people is go and get tested. And if it's latent, you can also still get treated so that if for any reason your immunity drops, the TB doesn't become active. So somebody that has symptoms, or you feel like you're exposed to somebody that has symptoms, get tested. If you're clean and you don't have it, good. Just keep maintaining good hygiene. And good hygiene is not just about cleaning. It's also about good ventilation, making sure that you're not living in densely populated houses or apartments. If you're a health worker, make sure you're always, well kitted, wearing your PPE, your mask. When you're exposed to people with respiratory symptoms, it's very, very important.
Right, Peter. One more question. For those who are latent patients of tuberculosis or HIV, as you said, asymptomatic, can they spread the virus? No symptoms, yes, but can they infect other people?
So HIV is different from tuberculosis in that case, that tuberculosis can only be spread by someone that has an active disease, like someone that has symptoms. Okay. HIV can be spread by somebody that doesn't have symptoms, but tuberculosis, the only way you can spread it is when you have symptoms. So latent is usually optional. If it's there and you feel it's not bothering you, you can decide to get it treated. You can decide not to get treated. The only risk to it is that there's that small 2% chance that if your immunity drops for any reason, person develops diabetes or they have a condition where they're not eating well or sleeping well, and their immunity drops, or they're pregnant or something, or they're on a medication that drops their immunity, it could activate this latent TB and it could become active. That's the only risk that you have with the latent TB, but it cannot be spread. You cannot infect anybody, and basically you can decide not to treat it if that's the course of action you want to take.
We have been talking to Dr. Peter Emelike. He is the president, Victoria Oyiya Health Foundation, speaking to us all the way from Canada. So it's a pleasure and always refreshing talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
We're still watching International Tit Bit here on Atlantic Television Network. We are broadcasting live from Lagos. We'll take a short break now, and when we return to bring you more news. Keep watching. to know we still have your attention here on Atlantic Television Network. You're watching International Tit Bit. Two more stories. Madeleine Albright, who fled the Nazi as a child in her native Czech Republic during World War II, but rose to become the first female U.S. Secretary of State, has died at the age of 84, her family said. Albright was a tough-talking diplomat in the United States administration that hesitated to involve itself in the two biggest foreign policy crises of the 90s, the genocide in Rwanda and the Bosnia. There are tweets out there paying condolences to her family, and one of which we are heartbroken to announce that Dr. Madeleine Albright, the 64th U.S. Secretary of State and the first woman to hold that position, passed away earlier today. The cause was cancer, the family said on Twitter on Wednesday. Albright, who had become the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations in 1993, had pressed for a tougher line against the Serb in Bosnia. But during President Bill Clinton's first term, many of the administration's top foreign policy experts vividly remembered how the U.S. became bogged down in Vietnam and were determined not to repeat that era in the Balkans. The U.S. responded by working with NATO on airstrikes that forced an end to the war, but only after it had been going on for 3 years. Albright's experience as a refugee prompted her to push for the U.S. to be a superpower that used that clout. Early in the Clinton administration, while she unsuccessfully advocated for a quicker, stronger response in Bosnia, Albright backed the UN War Crime Tribunal that eventually put the architect of the war, including Serbian President Slobodan and Bosnian Serbs leader, in jail. Albright, who was born in former Czechoslovakia in 1937, was nominated to become the first female Secretary of State and confirmed unanimously in 1997. She was on the post until 2001. During her tenure, NATO responded with an 11-week campaign of air raids in 1999 that extended to Belgrade after Serbs began a program of ethnic cleansing of ethnic Albanians in Kosovo. After a UN-commissioned study found that more than 500,000 Iraqi children had died in Iraq as a result of US-led sanctions after the first Gulf War, Albright defended the policy in an interview in 1996. In 2004, she told Democracy Now! That she regretted making that comment. In the lead-up to the Iraq War in 2003, Albright said the invasion was justified based on allegations that Baghdad possesses weapons of mass destruction. But she argued that the country did not pose an immediate threat to the U.S. and called for keeping focus on defeating al-Qaeda. During efforts of press North Korea to end its nuclear weapons program, which were eventually unsuccessful, Albright traveled to Pyongyang in 2000 to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, becoming the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit the country. While hailed in some circles as feminist icon, critics have criticized Albright's support for U.S. wars and sanctions. Meanwhile, Western leaders are gathering in Brussels for back-to-back emergency meetings of NATO, G7, and the European Union to draw up plans to ramp up pressure on Russian President Vladimir Putin and his country's invasion of Ukraine enters a second month. Joe Biden, the president of the United States, is expected to attend all three of Thursday's meetings. The U.S. leaders arrived in the European diplomatic capital late on Wednesday and is expected to push allies to enact new sanctions on Russia, which has already seen its economy crippled by a steady realm of bans, boycotts, and penalties over the last 4 weeks. While the West has been largely unified in confronting Russia after it invaded the Ukraine, that unity will likely be tested as the cost of war chips at the global economy. The energy crisis exacerbated by the war will be a particularly hot topic at the European Council summit, where leaders from Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Greece are hoping for an urgent, coordinated bloc-wide response. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has dismissed calls to boycott Russian energy supplies, saying it would cause significant damage to his country's economy, while the head of the European Union's executive arms has called for the U.S. to increase deliveries of liquefied natural gas so that the 27-nation bloc could reduce its dependence on Russian gas. Speaking at the European Parliament ahead of Biden's visit, Ursula de Leon said the EU was seeking a commitment for additional LNG supplies from the US for the next 2 winters. The EU imports 90% of natural gas used to generate electricity, heat homes and supply industry, with Russia supplying almost 40% of EU gas and a quarter of its oil. Sutherland told reporters that the issue has been a substantial topic and the subject of intense back and forth in recent days, and that Washington was looking for ways to surge LNG supplies to Europe to help make for supply disruptions. He said the NATO summit will look at beefing up security, while the EU and G7 summit will likely focus on ramping up sanctions against Russia. Ahead of Thursday's meeting, NATO Secretary General Jens said the alliance leaders are likely to agree to station more forces in Eastern Europe to deter a potential Russian attack and send more assistance to Ukraine, including equipment to help Kyiv defend itself against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Any use of chemical weapons would totally change the nature of the conflict and would be a blatant violation of international law and have far-reaching consequences, Stoltenberg said. He declined, however, to say whether such an attack would be a red line that might drag NATO into the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is expected to address the NATO summit by video, said late on Wednesday that he expects serious steps from NATO and Western leaders and wants the alliance to declare that it will fully assist Ukraine to win this war by supplying any weapon necessary. He also noted that Ukraine has not received the fighter jets or modern air defense system it requested, and said the country's military also need tanks and anti-ship systems. Biden, for his part, was expected to detail plans for new sanctions against Russia and humanitarian assistance for the region. One new sanction option that Biden is weighing is to target members of the Russian State Duma, the lower house of parliament, according to a U.S. official who spoke to reporters on the condition of anonymity to discuss private deliberations. The official added that a final decision has not been made and that the new sanctions will be